So before I end, let me talk about Burkina Faso too, because I've been there recently, this year. And I'm going there end of this month again. Some people asked me when I came back, why did you go there? There was a coup. So I said, yes, I wasn't there on the day of the coup. I didn't go to Burkina Faso on the day of the coup. But I was invited for the launch of the Sankara Mausoleum. But also I can see in Burkina there is a revolution, and I support progressive revolutions. And Sankara was a progressive leader of our continent who was assassinated. He supported women, he supported unity of the African continent, he supported countries feeding themselves, producing their own food. And they were launching his mausoleum. But also I can see what they are doing. For me, good governance is about whether you respond to the needs of your population. It's not about anything else. Do you respond to the needs of your population? Are you spending the resources of the country for the benefit of your population? If you are, that's good governance. If you are not, for me, that's not good governance. So, for now, I think Burkina is doing well. I'll be there from the 25th to the end of the month, because they are holding a big women's conference, and many women of the continent are going there. Because they believe that they cannot rise as Burkina without women, just as the continent will not rise without women. I thank you. On peace and security, I think peace and security remain the bedrock upon which justice and development must rest. There can be no development where there is war and conflict. But equally, you cannot sustain peace when there is no development. So, as a continent, we need to pay special attention to all the conflicts from the north to the Horn, Eastern DRC, Sudan, which continues to claim lives and livelihoods. And of course, women, children, and the elderly bear the biggest brunt. We must also reaffirm that peace is not just the absence of war, but it is the presence of justice, development, and freedom. When citizens are listened to, young people are educated and skilled, women are empowered and protected and included in the economy and decision-making in all areas of human endeavor, development becomes sustainable and communities resilient. Civil society organizations must work hand in hand with the Pan-African Parliament in mediating dialogue, promoting early warning, and peace building from the ground up. The Pan-African Parliament must serve not only as a legislative voice, but as a moral conscience, urging our governments towards good governance, rooted in the will of the people and sustainable development and unity of the African continent. Kwame Nkrumah, I quote him about unity, because without unity, this continent will never reach its full potential. He said, I quote, "Divided we are weak, and we are weak. United, Africa could become one of the greatest forces for good in the world," close quote. Africa must take its destiny in its own hands. Nobody is going to come and develop our continent for us. If we don't do it, it won't develop. We can't sit and be waiting for some people from across the oceans to come and do it for us. It's not going to happen. And also, we must decolonize our minds and believe in ourselves. Steve Biko, our first president of SASU, said, and I quote, "The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed." Because if your mind is decolonized, they don't need to come physically. You are already in prison. So let's decolonize our minds. And decolonizing our minds means taking charge of our economies. Why aren't we say Africa is rich in all this? The president was mentioning all the things we are rich in. The 60% of available arable land globally is on this continent, but this continent imports food. We have sunshine more than 300 days a year. We have water. We have a big population, more than 1.4 billion. Why can't we feed ourselves? Who will respect us if we can't feed ourselves? Thomas Sankara said, "Who feeds you controls you." So we must grow our food. We must process our natural resources. Some people boast of importing furniture. They boast, "My furniture is imported from there. Why? We have so much wood. Why do you import furniture? We have people, we have wood. There's no need. We grow cotton. Only 90% of our cotton is exported raw. Why? But we import fabric. And I'm glad Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are starting to make chocolate, because we sell cocoa beans, we get 8 billion around there. But the chocolate industry is more than 100 billion. So let's take charge of our economies. Let's beneficiate our minerals. Why are we sending these minerals raw? Sending minerals raw is exploiting jobs, high-paying jobs. We remain with the mining jobs, but the high-paying jobs are exported to where the minerals will be beneficiated. And exporting something raw, we are exporting revenue, because by the time it comes back to you as finished good, it's probably 10 times or more expensive. So let's wake up. We have everything that everyone who has developed used to develop. The only thing is, must decolonize our minds. and not think. You know, I lived in Addis, as you know. And one thing I learned from Addis, maybe it's because they were never colonized, is that they believe in themselves. You know, when they were building the Renaissance Dam that is now giving them the electricity, no investor came to invest. If it was some of us, we would still be waiting for the investors. But they didn't wait. They said, okay, we'll go ahead. The government did not have all the money to build that dam. But what they did, the diaspora contributed, but the citizens, everyone who had an Ethiopian number, and I'm one of them, I had an Ethiopian number for 4.5 years when I was there. You received an SMS every day, sometimes twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. And when you respond to that SMS, you donate $1 to that dam. Right? The citizens built that dam. They donated every day. And the dam is done now. Because they believed in themselves. Their minds were decolonized. But many of us would still be waiting for the investors to come. We wouldn't be having the electricity they are having because we are still waiting for the investors. So let's not wait. Let's do what we can do for ourselves. Also, just to give another example, when there was Ebola in those 3 countries, when we had the UN, President Obama, in a side meeting, said there are 1.4 million Africans are going to die if nothing drastic is done. The world did nothing drastic. But as Africans, we decided we're going to do something for ourselves. We called for volunteers from different countries to go and work in those countries. And indeed, we got more than 800 volunteers from different countries who went to work there. And we got business, African business, to give us money so that we can look after those people once they are there. And not even 100,000 people died, let alone the 1.4 that was. Some people, international organizations promised us money, it's still coming. So, and I interviewed 2 of the young people who volunteered, because they all came via Addis. We trained them, and then they left. One was from Kenya, and I said, what motivated you to volunteer? And he said, no, I just thought, what if this was happening in Kenya? And people were asked to come and help us, and nobody came. So I decided, no, I must go. And another one said, no, we always talk about Pan-Africanism. I thought this was a way of showing it in practice, and that's why I'm here. So I'm saying, if we put our minds to it, we can do everything on our continent. As long as we include everybody. If we exclude women and youth, forget. It's not going to happen. You can't walk on one leg and think you can compete with people who are walking with 2 legs. And women, let me tell you something. Do you know that there is research that shows how women and men spend their income? It says men spend a good 30% of their income on the family, right? I don't know what the 70%. but it's good enough, 30% goes to the family. But women, 70% of the income of women is spent on the family. So if you empower women, families will be better off. And also, there is also research that shows that companies that have more women in the management, top management, are more competitive. So it makes economic sense. Thank you very much, President of the Pan-African Parliament, His Excellency Fortune Sharumbia, honorable members of the Pan-African Parliament who are here, distinguished representatives of civil society, esteemed academics and researchers, representatives of regional and international organizations, members of the diplomatic corps, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to address this third civil society dialogue today. We meet today in this house that by its very nature is designed and symbolizes Africa's democratic aspirations, the Pan-African Parliament. It is fitting that one as representatives of the African civil society, academics, researchers, and many others. Because a parliament without the people becomes an echo chamber. But a parliament in dialogue with its citizens becomes a living engine for accountability and hope. That is the spirit of this third civil society parliamentary dialogue, to bring the voices of the people into the heart of African decision-making. We meet under the theme of the African Union 2025, I quote, Year of Reparations, Justice for Africa and the People of African Descent through reparations. And I was told to speak on that topic. So the theme addresses and emphasizes the historic and ongoing injustices rooted in colonialism, the transatlantic slavery trade, apartheid, and structural discrimination. It is framed as building a united front to advance the cause of justice and payment of reparations to Africans. The OAU, now the AU, has long recognized the need for reparations as a moral, historical, and economic issue tied to Africa's colonial past, slavery, and exploitation. Reparations are viewed as essential for justice, for healing, for development. It remains a key part of African Union's Agenda 2063, especially under the aspiration of an Africa with strong cultural identity, common heritage, shared values, and ethics. Before the first Pan-African Conference on reparations, this is not the first time we talk about reparations. There was a special conference in 1993 held in Abuja in Nigeria. But before that conference, there were lots of Pan-African conferences which were held mainly in the UK from 1900, which talked about reparations. They did not use the word reparations, but the essence of what they were discussing was about reparations. Those conferences, the first one was in 1900. They had 1919 to 1927, 1945. In fact, the 1945 conference, let me say, is what also inspired us to do Agenda 2063, a 50-year horizon. Because in 1945, at the Manchester Conference, the Pan-Africanists decided that Africa must be decolonized within 50 years. And then they put structures, strategies to make sure that it does get decolonized within 50 years. Other than Western Sahara, it was decolonized within 50 years. South Africa on the 49th year. So when we were celebrating 50 years of the OAU, we were celebrating the decolonization of Africa. Then we said, when they come back in 50 years, what would they be celebrating? That's how the idea of Agenda 2063 came to be. But let me say that at the 1993 conference on reparations that was held in Nigeria, the issue of slavery and colonization as a crime against humanity was, for the first time, specifically said. And it was also said that the West owes a moral, economic, and historic debt to Africa and its people. And it was said that reparations must come in different forms: financial compensation, debt cancellation, return of artifacts that were stolen, technology transfer, and institutional reforms. And that conference called for a reparation commission to be established. Fast forward from that conference, we also know that in 2001, here in South Africa, in Durban, there was a conference, an anti-racism conference that was held. And that conference produced two documents, a declaration and a program of action. But I will just take one or two things that that conference decided on. It decided that slavery, especially the transatlantic slavery trade, and officially declared it a crime against humanity. Now this was a global organization. Initially it was the Continental, now it was the UN. And that conference also recognized colonialism and apartheid as a cause of profound and lasting economic and social inequalities. And that conference called for reparations. Moral, material, and developmental to address these injustices. The conference also linked poverty to the historic exploitation of people of African descent and the indigenous peoples. So this theme this year builds on those And following that conference, there was a commitment by the UN to make sure that through the Human Rights Commission, this matter is followed up. And of course, there has been follow-ups, but there's not been really reparations. And I think that's why the AU decided that the theme should be reparations. So, what do we do about this theme? Is it just a theme that must be mentioned through the year and after that forgotten? Or should we do something about it? I think a lot should be done. I think the theme calls on us to confront historic injustices with courage and vision. It reminds us that legacies of slavery, colonization, and exploitation continue to shape our present, and that true liberation cannot be achieved without justice and reparative action. Allow me, in the spirit of inclusive governance, to remind us that gender justice must underline the agenda of reparations, because we all know that women, African women, bore the brunt of enslavement, of colonial labor system, land dispossession, and armed conflict. Even today, they still continue to bear that brunt of unpaid care, rural poverty, climate change. So reparations must mean justice for African women as well. And I'm stressing this because we tend to forget women in many areas of human endeavor. So they must have access to land, to finance, and full political participation. And they must lead in every area of human endeavor. They must be part of decision making. But also, saying plainly, there could be no reparations if women are excluded. That would not be reparations. But we must also speak about the youth. Africa is the youngest continent in the world. And reparations must speak to them, not as victims of history, but as designers of the future. Let us use this year to launch more youth research on reparative justice, to document our histories in African languages, to digitize archives, and to connect African youth with the diaspora so that Pan-Africanism becomes a lived experience, not just lectured. Reparations are not a plea for charity. They are a moral, legal, and historic imperative. Reparations are not about acknowledging the harm done, repairing the damage, and ensuring that the descendants of those who were dehumanized can live in dignity and equality. We're not asking for pity. We're asking for justice. We're not asking for handouts. We're asking for historic honesty. And different institutions must take their responsibilities in this campaign. The AU Commission has responsibility for policy coordination and diplomatic engagements. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights has the responsibility for legal grounding and interpretation. The Pan-African Parliament, in my view, has both a legislative and advocacy role. It should draft modern laws on reparations, restitution, and historic justice, and the diaspora. And it should collaborate for global advocacy with civil society. Because civil society organizations are going to be critical in this campaign. I don't know whether they've started working on it or not. Civil society organizations play a vital role as intermediaries between citizens and the state. They should explain their theme to the citizens and work with citizens to mobilize for reparations. Civil society organizations must empower individuals to participate in civic life, mobilize communities, and facilitate dialogues like today.
Thank you, Africa.